It's the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham, and this week we're joined by Colin Jackson, a reporter with the Michigan Public Radio Network. We just heard you, actually. Colin, thanks for being here. You're not a one-trick pony. You can do a lot of things.
That's what I'm saying. I got at least 3 tricks in me, you know.
Yeah. Ollie, like you said, you can do some skateboarding.
We'll try. I can knit. We'll hear more about that later this week.
We will. I'm super excited about that. But once again, thanks for being here with us this week. What can we expect on the show today?
Oh, we can expect so much on the show today. Later in the program, again, pretty much everyone in politics wants to increase the population, but there are disagreements on how to accomplish that. So later in the hour, we will hear a conversation with a scholar from a free market think tank about what it thinks the state needs to do to get more to move here.
But first up on the Metro, some believe poetry is a lost art. But don't say that to folks in Michigan. That's in part thanks to the efforts of many local arts organizations that foster poetry and the work of many poets around the state. That includes the work of Michigan Poet Laureate Nandi Comer. A native Detroiter and a Kresge Arts Fellow, Nandi was recently given another award for her efforts in expanding access to poetry. She's one of 23 fellows for the Academy of American Poetry. That project would help her use billboards to expose the public to the work of Michigan poets. Here to discuss her latest project, what it's been like to be the state poet laureate, and to explore an event she's teaching, we have Nandi Comer here. Nandi, welcome back to the Metro.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
Yes.
Great to be here.
Of course. I always love to have you on the Metro. So, I reached out to you because I heard about the recent fellowship that you were awarded from the Academy's Poet Laureate Fellowship. Congratulations on that, number one.
Thank you.
So what will you use those funds for? I saw that you have Michigan Words Initiative.
So the Michigan Words Project is a project that I and the Library of Michigan have been working on the whole time since I've been appointed to serve as a Michigan Poet Laureate. They asked me what I wanted to do for my capstone project, and I wanted to showcase Michigan poets in their own communities so that we as a city, as a town, as a municipality can see our poets physically and know who they are and really celebrate them. So I've decided to put them as visible as we can, and that is on billboards in pedestrian areas. When we're walking around Midtown or we're walking around in the UP, around Houghton and Marquette, that we'll actually see our Michigan poets and we'll see their words on display for everyone to see.
And we always talk about representation, but what does this type of representation mean to see the faces and the works of the poets connected in those spaces, especially as you're just traveling through the state of Michigan?
I mean, it's a big thing. It's a big thing not only for us to undertake such a project because, one, just the decision of who would get displayed was one that we really had to spend a long time thinking about. Michigan is a very strong poetry community. We do not have a lack in it. And so the first was just deciding how do we decide who gets to be on display. And then the next thing was, well, where do we put them? What is the most efficient way? We know that we don't have a lot of time on the highway when we're looking at billboards to read a whole poem. So we also decided, it's got to be a short excerpt. And the other thing was when we were about what represents Michigan poetry and where can we place them, we're talking about 2 peninsulas, right? And so we, through the Library of Michigan, which is headed by the Department of Education, that's how we decided on the regions, is through the Department of Education's regional division. And that's how we came up with where they would be displayed. We're going to have a Detroit writer displayed in Detroit. We're going out to the Flint area. We'll be up in the UP. So we really decided all over Michigan we're going to have a good representation of poets.
And Nandi, just working in this particular scope in the city of Detroit and in Michigan in general, but learning about poetry, learning about the different poets throughout the city, how do you think that Michigan became, in Detroit in particular, but how do you think it became such a strong space for poetry?
I don't think it ever wasn't a strong place for poetry. We have poets like Rothke that came out of Saginaw. We have our first consultant to poetry to the Library of Congress, Robert Hayden. We have Diane Seuss, who was a Pulitzer Prize winner. We just have, I think because poets oftentimes have trouble celebrating themselves, we sometimes forget how rich our history is in poetics. I think that we've never really had a drought in talent. So maybe aren't like the New York, where like all the write-up going. I think that we as writers need to have support in order to like find the kind of support that will help us continue in our profession.
Yeah, and just kind of staying on that when we talk about the city of Detroit and poetry here, I mean, once again, if you're not necessarily tapped in, or even if you are, but if you're not necessarily tapped in, it may not be something that you know about or maybe not hear about as often. But in recent years, we have. So what are some of the things that you've been seeing in recent years, especially in the city of Detroit, that's been pushing out poetry and pushing the poets to the forefront?
I have been very happy to see some of the organizations and institutions and cultural workers really supporting writers. The way that Kresge is able to provide some financial support to some of the best writers coming out of the city and residing in the city. There are other organizations that have been providing reading opportunities through reading series, through slams. But I have been recently, in the last couple of years, trying to figure out how to support writers in their own career moves. So oftentimes we find a lot of support for work or perform work, but we don't get a lot of support in like what's it after we do the work? How do we get it to publication? How do we actually talk to a publicist? And so I've helped to start this organization called Detroit Lit. And Detroit Lit specifically focus on writers of color because I find that a lot of writers of color are the ones that are asking me, can you support me? And what do I do to get a fellowship? What do I do to get my book published? And so Detroit Lit has been holding panels. And this summer we're doing a conference that specifically will be tied to what do you do with your work once you've already written it?
Yeah. And if you're just joining the show, we're chatting with Nandi Comer, Michigan's Poet Laureate and Detroit native. Nandi was recently awarded $50,000 to begin her new initiative, Michigan Words, which you'll see those billboards highlighting different poets throughout the city of Detroit, but just the state of Michigan as well. They're going to be really, really cool, and you get to see them and who the poet is in your region, in your neighborhood, which is great. But Nandi, just going back to the Detroit Lit Summer Writers Institute, that's happening tomorrow. I saw the lineup of some of the folks that are going to be in attendance with you, helping you out and helping teach those writers as well. So what is the goal of this series?
So the goal of the series is really to provide professional development to writers. We want writers who, we know that our writers oftentimes have goals to become very known in their community, to publish in their community, but they don't know the steps to getting there. And so I'm really excited that we're able to have some of the best, most talented writers in Detroit who have already accomplished a lot in their careers really lay out some really great advice, some really great training on how to do that. So we have Detroit's own Detroit Poet Laureate, Jessica Care Moore, who's going to be joining a panel with Talana Petty and Tariq Latham to talk about how they have moved between the performance world and the public world. And if someone is in either of those fields, how to really get a step into both of those worlds. We're also going to do one of the things that I think is really important is how do you write an artist CV? Oftentimes people think a resume is what artists use in order to talk about their work experience. And actually it's a CV. And so a lot of people don't know how to even write that. And so we have Jonah Mixon-Weber out of Flint, who's going to come down to Detroit and give an in-depth conversation with writers who are interested, because the CV, you need it for everything. You need it for a job. You need it for a fellowship. You need it just sometimes to apply to enter into a contest. And so we really hope that we can really give some real hardcore, some hard skills to all the participants to come.
Nandi, I think this is really interesting because it feels like for so many people that writing or becoming a poet just feels out of reach. And it sounds like you're really giving people the tools to accomplish that for themselves. I'm curious, what does it mean to have more empowered writers and poets in our community?
I mean, I think that it just means that we are going to really get stronger and stronger. We're a strong city. We have strong writers. The only thing is that we have a lot of talent that needs to be supported. And I think that while we have institutions that are supporting folks in many different ways, there's sometimes a little bit of a gap when it comes down to mentoring people through the details of what it takes to get from, starting out with your work to really like being the kind of artist that they really want to become. And I'm really happy to be a part of a community that can really support artists doing that.
Oh, I love that so much. So, Nandi, before I let you go, the Detroit Lit Summer Writers Institute, which is happening over 3 days, it's going to be 3 different events happening throughout the Institute. I just want you to get into the Detroit Lit organization one more time, just a little bit deeper, and let us know a little bit more about some of the work that's being done through the Detroit Lit organization.
Sure. We provide reading and professional development opportunities for writers of color all over the Metro Detroit area. And we really try to focus on having writers who have already accomplished these things help to mentor writers who are trying to accomplish new goals in their careers. The Writing Institute this summer, while it starts tomorrow, we've spread out the sessions over 2 weeks because we know folks are busy. Nice. And we really want people to be able to go attend as many things as possible. So we start tomorrow, but it's actually 4 sessions over the next 2 weeks. One session that I just want to highlight before I go is we have a how to write a book pitch workshop. That book pitch workshop will allow writers to learn how to really prepare documents to showcase what they've already written so that publishers will be interested in taking on their books.
Which is huge. It's a huge step to teach writers how to do something like that so they can just present and even get their books and manuscripts in the hands of people who can actually help them. So Nandi Comer is a Detroit native, Michigan's Poet Laureate, and will be hosting the Detroit Lit Summer Writers Institute, which includes 4 sessions. And the first one begins tomorrow at 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at 27th Letter Books on Michigan Avenue in Detroit. That's that border of Southwest and Corktown there in Detroit. Nandi, thanks for being on the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Thanks.
Coming up, many people in Michigan want our population to increase, but what's the best way to do that? We'll hear from one free market economist about what he thinks is the best way to do that.
The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham. This week we're joined by Colin Jackson, a reporter with the Michigan Public Radio Network. Hi, Colin.
Hey, Tia.
Just checking the weather. Today and Wednesday, highs in the lower 80s. Sunny with clouds. Thursday, mostly cloudy with a high around 81. So that looks like it's going to be good for the Sounds Like Detroit concert. If you all are heading there, it's hosted by Jeff Milo. It's happening Thursday at New Center Park. Don't forget that. As well, Friday, there's a chance of rain and thunderstorms with a high around 80 degrees. We will see rain over the weekend as well with highs in the upper 70s, but we will be clear Thursday for Sounds Like Detroit. So that's a good thing. And I think about Sounds Like Detroit and different events and all the cool things that are happening in the state and how my friends aren't here to appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think that's something that a lot of young people in Michigan can relate to. We've had friends move to places like Chicago, Texas. Some of them are in California, some of them in New York. You know, Atlanta's a big one.
Yeah, lost a lot of my friends to Atlanta, and this next conversation, they may have ideas to retain some of these workers.
That is absolutely right, Tia, because Michigan's population has been stagnating. The state ranks 49th of 50 in growth since 2020. And by 2050, Michigan's population is projected to shrink. Now, no one knows the future, of course, but most people in politics believe this is a big issue that needs to be resolved. In this past year, the state came out with a report suggesting changes. It wants to make Michigan an innovation hub. It wants to expand higher education opportunities and invest in public transit and housing construction. But those aren't the only ideas being tossed around to increase state population. The Mackinac Center for Public Policy, a free market think tank, is hosting an event today from now until 1 p.m. at Ike's Restaurant in Sterling Heights to discuss different ways to increase the state population. Our producer, Sam Corey, sat down with Michael Lefebvre of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy to learn more about what his think tank believes will bring people to the state.
People at the Mackinac Policy Center believe that people move to other places for economic opportunity. That seems super basic, but explain why you think that's true.
Well, there's been decades of scholarship by academics with no dog in Michigan's particular fight. And so we've reviewed the extensive body of literature, more than 100 quality peer-reviewed studies. And the majority of them point to economic reasons. So economic freedom, for instance, seems to beget economic opportunity, which induces moves from one place to another. It's not the only thing that matters. We actually recognize this and discuss quality of life issues as well, how to measure those and what the literature says about that as well.
So, yeah, I'm glad you got into that because I think this is just broadly true. I mean, I think people move to places for economic opportunity. They want to get richer. They want a better life. And quality of life also goes along with that. The interesting thing reading the economist Hannah Kling's report, which I know y'all published at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, was that there's a lot of things that could be done. We could try to increase funding for education. You could try to make education better. You could try to improve childcare. You could spend more money on that. In general, the sense that I get from the report is like, you can try to do a lot of things, but not that much will come from government policy. In a sense, there's actually not that much that government can do to increase migration to a state or a particular place. Is that a fair reading of the report?
Fair with one quibble. There are a couple of variables that seem to be hugely important ones in the overall equation. Otherwise, we wouldn't see so many people moving to Florida. From 2020 to 2021, about 7,300 of our fellow citizens here in Michigan picked up and moved to the state of Florida. That's just in 1 year and on net balance. We subtract out those from Floridians who moved to Michigan. They took $1.4 billion worth of taxable income with them. So we've not only lost the spending that would occur in our communities, we've lost the money that government might otherwise tax away for true public goods that would also induce people to move to Michigan. So there are variables that matter. The Tax Foundation reports that in 2023, the states with the lowest overall burdens on average saw greater inbound migration than those without it.
Lowest tax burdens, you mean?
Yeah, lowest tax burdens. And then, of course, there's a labor market regulation is also very important. In the literature, right-to-work variables crop up a lot. You see labor market flexibility and with specific attention paid to right-to-work laws as a draw. Now, people don't wake up and think, oh, Texas is a right-to-work state, therefore I'm moving to Texas. But because it helps facilitate economic growth and development, it ultimately ends up being a draw for people to move from one state to another.
So you mentioned one of the things that I wanted to get to, which was lower taxation. And I appreciate you talking about that. Hannah's report was suggesting all of the evidence around what brings people into a particular place, a particular state, what causes in-migration. She talks about three things. One is lower taxation. The other is higher quality services. And the last thing is lighter regulations. I think this is really interesting. How do you have higher quality services, right? How do you have better public schools, better transit, nicer parks? How do you have all those things with also lighter taxes? That seems to be in tension with each other.
Right. It does seem to be. However, states can spend more productively, more efficiently. Instead of authorizing $4.4 billion in new corporate welfare handouts since 2023, what if we had instead authorized that spending for better roads and bridges? Michigan's Asset Management Transportation Council says we're still not putting together roads as fast as they're falling apart. This would be an inducement, right? Spend the more money more productively and bring in more people as a result. It's also worth noting that people are willing to pay a premium for, say, quality schools. But they're also very happy with more choice among quality schools. And you see that in data produced by other scholars.
I wanna hold on schools. We're gonna come back to it because I do think it's a really interesting example about why people move to where they do. But I do want to hold on one thing that a lot of people seem to be in agreement on, even people who work in the state, which is fewer regulations, particularly when it comes to housing. Can you talk about the importance of people moving to places like the South, the Southwest, because living is just cheaper. It's just easier to build in those spaces.
Well, it's easier to build in many regards, but also there's one important wrinkle on the housing question that we need to look at. People have been selling Michigan as having a lower cost of living because our housing costs are lower. But to me, as an economist, I look at that and say, well, that suggests that we are not a desirable place to live. And that's what quality of life economists are looking at. Are people willing to pay a premium for their housing because it's such a desirable place to live? In Florida, that's a big yes. In Michigan right now, unfortunately, that's a no, although there are pockets in Michigan where that applies. Traverse City, Kent County, you're seeing people pay premiums because they want to live in those areas.
That's interesting. But I do, I guess, want to nail down the point of being able to buy a nicer home, a bigger home, or even just a good apartment, or live in for a cheaper rent in a place that's really nice. Like people like moving to Charleston, South Carolina. They like moving to North Carolina. They like moving to Florida, as you're saying, and even Texas. You can either buy or rent for much cheaper. And that does appear to be, honestly, about regulations. It's a lot easier to build, and there's a lot fewer, importantly, zoning laws that allow people to build a lot of different types of structures. What do you make of that, that perspective?
In fact, that's very important. Again, it comes back to choice. It comes back to lower burdens, and not just in terms of taxes, but in terms of what builders have to pay to put up a building. It's part of the overall calculus, right? You have zoning regulations in some areas that are less burdensome, so it makes it easier for developers to invest and build. And so housing costs may be cheaper for that reason.
The state of Michigan came out with a housing report a few years ago, and essentially what it said was, like, we don't have enough housing, we need to build more, and we need to build more different types of housing. And they specifically argued to do what actually happens in the South, or in much of the South, which is to have fewer zoning regulations. I'm curious what you make of that argument from the state.
Right. And it's a great idea to clear hurdles that will allow people to move in, whether it's to help builders move in and make the investment, or people to find these lower cost homes.
What I do want to go back to for a second is education. There's a lot of people I know who live in Michigan. They live in the suburbs of Detroit, and they want to move to Detroit. They would love to move to Detroit. The problem is the schools. The problem is the schools are underfunded. Absentee rates are really high, right? Detroit is poor, and you need more of essentially like mixed income people going to schools in order to raise the quality. That's at least one of the ideas. And you need more funding going to those schools to improve them. They say that they would move to Detroit if that were the case, if it had more funding, if it was more equitable funding, if the state invested more in education in the schools. I'm curious what you make of this argument, because I don't think you think that if you increase public funding for education, then necessarily it'll drive migration. But I don't know. I am somewhat skeptical on that point.
So not alone. It's not funding alone that matters, because there will reach a point where that marginal dollar does not produce a marginal improvement in education. So I would recommend looking towards greater choice.
Last question for you. One of the things we haven't talked about, but it's kind of an obvious one for some people, is increasing immigration. Just increase immigration in the state, you're going to increase the population. A lot of people want to move to the U.S. A lot of people would move to Michigan. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I would be delighted to see a higher inbound migration from international individuals wanting to move here for a better life. It enriches our entrepreneurial risk-taking blood. In fact, I married an immigrant, and she has the same type of wonderfully positive, energetic outlook that so many previous generations of immigrants have. So I'm a fan. I applaud their entrepreneurial spirit. I would like to see more legal immigration, much more of it, but I'm not in charge of that.
That was producer Sam Corey speaking with Michael Lefebvre, the senior director of the Moray Fiscal Policy Initiative at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. You can find more about what the think tank believes will increase the state's population if you go to Ike's Restaurant in Sterling Heights between now and 1 p.m.
Welcome back. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. You caught us having a quick chat here. I'm Tia Graham here with Colin Jackson, a reporter with the Michigan Public Radio Network. And Colin, we do have the WDET listener survey, which is back, and we want to hear from you, the listener. What do you think of the Metro so far? Believe me, we really do read every single thing that you all send over, so share your thoughts, and you can win some neat WDET swag. It's quick, it's anonymous, and you'll be helping us serve you better. So take that survey now at wdet.org/survey. However, just listen to that recent conversation, and we were talking about it a little bit. Our friends moved out of the state. My friend's been gone for about 4 years now. I don't know about you as well, but just seeing my friends leave to go to find jobs and different things like that, it's been really hard.
Finding jobs, finding opportunities, just finding a little more life, finding walkable cities, etc. And at the same time, though, it's interesting because whenever I'm out and I do meet someone that's visiting Michigan for whatever reason, whether it's a festival or something else, they always talk about how lovely it is here and how much fun, they wish they were here. People from LA, New York, but no one's moving.
They're not here. I was going to say they're not coming here. So it's really interesting to see what officials can do, state officials can do to try to bring more folks, young people, especially back to the state of Michigan and to Detroit proper, just so we can see the young people come back.
You hear a lot about livability stuff, and that came up in that conversation as well, just ways to get around the city.
Yeah, and Sam talks about that. Our producer who actually did that conversation, Sam Corey, he talks about that quite often where he's like, we need public transit. Yes, we do. And that'd be one reason or one thing that would bring some young folk back. Walkable cities, easier to get around. But we do have something coming up next. A local foster care facility is hosting a resource fair for teen parents and their families in Detroit tomorrow. We'll get into that and more with the organization's CEO in our next conversation. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham here with Colin Jackson, a reporter with Michigan Public Radio Network. And Colin, what conversation are you bringing with us next?
So we're going to talk about something that I think is relatable to a lot of people in Michigan. And in America, there are not a lot of resources to help children and young parents especially. If you lack money for a babysitter, pretty much the only thing you have is the people around you. The Methodist Children's Home Society, though, wants to add some resources to that list. The foster care agency is hosting their annual community resource fair tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. for teen parents in Detroit's Virginia Park neighborhood. So to talk more about the resource fair and the resources and the experiences of young parents, we have Kevin Roach here. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Methodist Children's Home Society. Kevin, welcome to the Metro.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Colin.
It's a pleasure. Parenting is hard these days. Can you talk a little bit about the specific challenges that teen parents face?
Yeah, I was going to say your first statement really resonated. As a father of 3 children, all under the ages of 11, parenting is really difficult. So I can't imagine, right, that being a parent and being a teenager or being a really young person or lacking a support system, how much more difficult that becomes in terms of being a parent on this end. And so we're certainly excited to certainly have some small solutions or some resources and helping those families and ensuring that they have the safety and permanency that they need.
Right. There are a lot of jarring things about an unplanned pregnancy, especially when you're younger in your teens. And I think that there's a lot of shame and stigma that can go along with that. People can blame and stigmatize teens who get pregnant. Can you talk about the situations that lead to teen pregnancy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the first part that you mentioned, Colin, in terms of that stigma is certainly on point, right? And when we think about all the judgments, the critiques, everything that is front-loaded onto those young people, right, it almost paralyzes them to actually want to take action or actually take some meaningful steps or even reach out and ask for that help, right? And so that stigma is certainly a real thing. We can all probably think of somebody in our lives that had an unplanned pregnancy and that they were young on this end, and some of the really difficult choices that person will face. And if they're isolated or if they're on their own or if they're trying to navigate those situations, right, we know that those factors are exponentially more difficult on this end. And so overcoming that stigma is such a huge first step on this end. Related to, right, what contributes to teen pregnancy, or what has actually looked at why those teens are getting pregnant, or those young people or those families are starting off earlier. I mean, I think the research is really vast in terms of everything that contributes to unstable households, to certainly mental health and substance abuse, to domestic violence, right, and human trafficking, and a number of other issues that maybe are on the outliers or certainly part of the mainstream, all different factors that do contribute to teen pregnancy, right? It's not just a singular factor or an overwhelming issue.
Right. It's a complex issue, and people are going through a lot in life. Something interesting is the statistics show there are fewer teen parents today than there were a few decades ago. What are some of the differences between the challenges teen parents may face today versus in the 90s, for example?
I mean, I think that at the forefront is the issue of social media on this end. And I don't want to say that social media is the scapegoat or we blame social media for a lot of the root causes on this end, but we also know that that is a factor or can exacerbate. And certainly one of the biggest challenges that a teenager is going to face today, as opposed to one in the 90s or even in the 2000s, where social media didn't have as much of a prominent role, or certainly wasn't a key component in young people's lives in terms of how they interact and connect with the outside world on this end. And so I can only think about the enormous pressures that social media certainly would have, as that limelight or that ability to have privacy or that ability to actually reveal personal aspects of your life becomes magnified even greater under the limelight of social media, regardless of whether it's TikTok or Facebook or one of the many other channels that they have on this end. And then when you think about just the rise of youth mental health in our community, and whether that is a product of the pandemic that we are 3 or 4 years still from, or rather we're just talking about a lot more, right, on this end. We know that youth mental health certainly has taken on a much more in-depth and meaningful role in this aspect. And so when we think about that combination of social media, we know that our youth today who are pregnant are facing significantly more challenges than certainly those maybe a few decades removed.
Right, absolutely. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Kevin Roach. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Methodist Children's Home Society. His organization is hosting a fair for teens for teen parents tomorrow, and that's something I want to get into. Your agency has a teen infant parenting services program. So before we get into the resource fair happening tomorrow, I want to hear a little bit about that program and the services you offer young parents.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we're thankful that you are shedding a little bit more light into this program. And so for our organization that's been around for a little over 100 years, we were traditionally in that residential foster care arena, right? And it was those children who have been abused and neglected, removed from the system, coming into a residential facility like ours on this end. And as trauma-informed as we were, and the work that we were really embarking on, we also had this mission that we wanted to intervene earlier, right? We wanted to get more involved. We didn't want to wait for that child just to show up on our front doors and then surround them with services. And we also realized that our children that were coming to us didn't operate in just a vacuum, right? There was a family support system around there, and our ability to work with the family as a whole was going to have significantly better outcomes than what we were trying to do. And so we made this pretty big shift to really start to intervene sooner. And one of those decisions that we had was this Teen Infant Parenting Services Program, which is a 16-unit affordable housing program for these young people who are pregnant or are young parents, right, between the ages of 18 and 25, and realizing that when you combine teenage pregnancy and homelessness, right? We know that we can only imagine what those outcomes could potentially be, not only for that child or for that infant, but certainly for the mom or for the dad that's involved on this end. And so by having this program in place in the city of Detroit, in the Virginia Park neighborhood, right, we wanted to make sure that we were in the community, we were accessible, and certainly relatable on that end, and making sure that we had those meaningful connections. And as a result of that, we started to get a lot of feedback on what were the needs that they had. So whether that was diapers or formula, or whether that was resume writing or career building, or even job placement, along with maternal health issues, right? Knowing that there is a higher correlation, right, between a mother who is housing unstable or is insecure or experiencing that instability, related to, of course, her ability to have a healthy child, right? And all of that comes back, right, a decade later. And I tell our lawmakers all the time, we either pay for it now or we pay for it later, right? And you can pay for it later with that child in the system, or you can actually be intentional and meaningful upfront with the resources that's needed, that oftentimes it doesn't take much for that family to get their footing, for that young person to be motivated, to be healthy, ensure there's a good life in place for their family unit, and to certainly continue moving forward. And so that was really the creation of this program as a whole.
And again, that Teen Resources Fair is happening tomorrow in the Virginia Park neighborhood. Briefly, in the time we have left, what are some of the resources teen parents can expect to receive tomorrow?
Yeah, we're really excited about the number of great partners that have come out to share the support. And so whether you are on the hunt for a job or wanting to get new business clothes in place, or whether it's diapers and formula or other resources in terms of what you need to do for the first stage or the second stage of that child's life, there's going to be an abundance of resources, and everyone is welcome to join.
Kevin Roach is the CEO of the Methodist Church Home Society. Kevin, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Hey, thanks so much for having us and shedding a light on this issue.
The Resource Fair for teen parents will be held tomorrow from 11 a.m. until 2 p.m. Anyone interested can find this free fair and community party at 1600 Blaine Street in Detroit.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. Just heard from Colin Jackson and Kevin Roach, the CEO of the Methodist Church Home Society, with a resource fair happening tomorrow in Virginia Park, and coming up on the Metro to infinity and beyond. Our next conversation will take us through an Afro-futuristic ride as we learn more about an art exhibit in Detroit ahead of Afro Nation this weekend. This is the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham here with Colin Jackson, reporter with the Michigan Public Radio Network. Colin, are you into sci-fi and fantasy?
You know, I remember specifically the first time I became aware of Star Wars.
Yeah.
It was the Phantom Menace, Darth Maul, that double-edged lightsaber. I thought that was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen in my life.
Honestly, for me, pretty much the same. I was introduced to the old school 1977 Star Wars, but then, of course, our generation, we watched the middle three, the clones.
Attack of the Clones was the first movie I saw twice in theaters.
Okay, and I love the purple lightsaber that Samuel L. Jackson used. It was just like he gets to use a purple lightsaber? Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And I think about just science fiction in general and representation within science fiction. That's what Afrofuturism is. And science fiction is meant to help us unlock our imaginations, to stretch our thinking to new realms of possibility, whether it's new technology or different ways of relating to each other. The art form helps us open possibilities to a better future. But what happens when that future is closed to so many people? And so the past few decades, science fiction, whether in movies or books, hasn't put Black and brown people at the top of the story. But people working in that art space are constantly working to change that. Such is the case with Return of the Start, a Star Wars exhibition which is on display at the Northwest Gallery of Art. The exhibit the exhibit features artistic depictions of Star Wars with an Afro-futuristic bent. The goal is to celebrate the broad diversity of Star Wars fandom. Joining us on the Metro now to chat more about the exhibit is the owner and founder of the Northwest Gallery of Art, Asia Hamilton. Asia, welcome to the Metro.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Of course. So there's an exhibit, of course, that you all have up right now, Return of the Start, a Star Wars exhibition. But you also have an event that's happening this Thursday ahead of Afro Nation that kind of pays respect to Afrofuturism. So if you can go into that event.
Yeah, absolutely. This Thursday from 4 to 9 p.m., Return of the Start is featuring an Afrofuturist experience. It's like the ultimate festival event and kickoff for Afro Nation. Is featuring South African artists Von Mash and Sarai Labello, and it offers a fresh perspective on Star Wars fandom through the lens of Afrofuturism.
And Asia, are you a Star Wars fan?
I'm beginning to be a Star Wars fan. I remember watching it as a kid. I was born in 1978, so just watching it as a kid and seeing the various different things, and I am the father and all of the cool stuff that came with Star Wars. But the curator Alonzo Del Arte, he came up with the concept. Yeah. He's a huge fan of the trilogy, and he's a brown person himself.
Yes, and for me, when I saw this and I saw the connection to Star Wars, I am a huge Star Wars, just sci-fi nerd. I'm watching Star Wars. I'm watching anything that's sci-fi in space all the time. And I always think to myself or ask myself, are there Black people in the future when I'm watching some of these shows and these movies? So, where did the idea come from? Of course, you just said Alonzo, this is his brainchild. Where did Alonzo get this idea from?
Him being such a fan, he wanted to see more Black and brown people. He knows tons of, people that are huge fans, but wasn't seeing that representation in the movies or, just within the fandom itself. So he wanted to just bring attention to the representation that's in that fandom, as well as, some of the, actors like Billy D. Williams, and bringing that energy forward in the show.
Yeah. So what does Afrofuturism mean to you personally?
Yes, absolutely. So Afrofuturism to me is like Black identity, a world that's untouched, a world where we thrive untouched. It's endless possibility and fantasy merged into realistic imagery. It's just beautiful. It's an opportunity for us to just be, just imagine not being touched in any way, from slavery and all of the drama that our culture has been through, and to be able to just thrive, into the future. How would it have been, for the future? That's what it is to me. I'm an artist as well. I feel like I've, started to, back in the day, I started seeing these images and, creating these digital pieces that were like, what is this? And I feel like it's just in our hearts and our minds to visualize and be this energy.
If you're just tuning in, we're chatting with Detroiter, photographer, and Northwest Gallery of Art owner and founder Asia Hamilton about an exhibition on display featuring Afro-futuristic Star Wars-inspired art. And Asia, just thinking about the importance of seeing yourself in these particular genres. You talked a little bit about your background as an artist yourself. So what are some of those ways and ways that you've tried to photograph, portrait, highlight what you see through your eyes, Black identity?
All of my work is a reflection of self. Mm-hmm. So Black identity is in everything that I do. The gallery definitely showcases, people of all nations, but we definitely, have a focus on, African and African American art. And this was a great opportunity to bring the two cultures together. I mean, even though, we're African American, we're still not African. And being that we have this amazing festival going on this weekend, we can kind of merge the two cultures and celebrate Afrofuturism, what it would look like as a people as a whole together. So I'm excited about the return of the start. We have some really dope artists who are demonstrating some really futuristic work, and so I'm excited to show that work and have people be immersed in it.
I love it. Nerds unite. I love it. Colin?
Yeah, I want to take this in a slightly different direction because I'm curious. When I think Afrofuturism, I think of this exhibit I saw in D.C. at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And one of the parts of that exhibit was a spacesuit, a suit from Space Camp, and it belonged to Trayvon Martin. And I'm curious when you had talked about, and there was a gut punch seeing that, but I'm curious when you talked about what this means for Black identity, I'm wondering, what does seeing Black people represented in Afrofuturist art forms and expressions, what does that mean for even the outside perception of the Black community?
Yeah, being a nerd was completely frowned upon.
Yes.
And a Black nerd was just unheard of, but it's clear that, we were, that nerd just runs the world. So, to everything that we need, from traffic lights or super soakers, even the lightsaber from Star Wars, made by a Black man. It is, it's important to recognize, how powerful our minds can be. So in the Black community, I mean, it's evident, the work that we put in.
And Asia, just, using that term, I actually had one of the questions here, Black nerd in quote, because it was frowned upon growing up for a lot of us to be, quote unquote, a Black nerd, to talk about the things that we loved in sci-fi and in the worlds that maybe others may not have understood. So if we could just go into that just a little bit more, and the importance of having an exhibit like the one we're going to be able to see at Norwest Gallery of Art in Detroit.
Yeah, anything affiliated with being smart, people felt was out of our reach. But, we had 3 brilliant African-American women from NASA, Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson. They served, as brains behind launching a man into space. And if that ain't Afrofuturism, then I don't know what is. We have definitely did the work.
That's exactly how I'm going to end it. I love that quote, how we're going to end it. Asia Hamilton is a Detroiter, a photographer, and Norwest Gallery of Art owner and founder. The event that's happening is this Thursday, August 15th from 4 to 9 p.m. at Norwest Gallery in Detroit. One more time, that exhibit, Return of the Start, a Star Wars exhibition. It is on display now through the end of October 27th to be exact, at the Norwest Gallery of Art. Asia, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. We will have you back soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
This is the Metro 1019 WDET FM. Before we close the show, WDET's 2024 Sounds Like Detroit Showcase is coming up. The concert is hosted by WDET's Jeff Milo and features 5 listener favorites. Tiny Desk contestants from Detroit bring a chair or a blanket and join us at New Central Park Thursday, August 15th. Tickets on sale at WDET.org/events.
That's the Metro for Tuesday, August 13th. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org, and you can make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The show is also on YouTube if you like listening that way. This show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Additional production support from Sydney Walk-Lee. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions.
And this is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening. Colin and myself will be back tomorrow.